a great deal of time now on King David. And much of this that we're going to read now, because we have First and Second Kings and Samuel, we are able to understand and know what is going on. Those people in those days, many of them had little or no knowledge of it. And so keep in mind that this is information that is almost historical, and that many people from the various tribes are going to find out where their ancestors worked, what they were called to, and why they were called to do it. And it would give them a basis for doing things, perhaps. Okay? So let's go to 19 now as we recount Ezra's presentation of the history of David. Jean?
It happened after that Nahash, the king of the people of Ammon, died, and his son reigned in his place. Then David said, I will show kindness to Hanun, the son of Nahash, because his father showed kindness to me. So David sent messengers to comfort him concerning his father. And David's servant came to Hanun in the land of the people of Ammon to comfort him. And the princes of the people of Ammon said to Hanun, do you think that David really honors your father because he has sent comforters to you? Did his servants not come to you to search and to overthrow and to spy out the land? Therefore Hanun took David's servants, shaved them, cut off their garments in the middle at their buttocks, and sent them away. Then some went and told David about the men, and he sent to meet them because the men were greatly ashamed. And the king said, wait at Jericho until your beards have grown, and then return.
Okay, stop right there. What does this mean? What has happened here? What does this mean?
David David is showing wanting to show respect. So David um, sends his men to show respect to the dead because of the kindness that that the king of Ammon had done shown towards him.
Okay, so what happens when after David sends his messengers to the son of the king who had been kind to him, who had assisted him. So David heard of his death, and David wanted to show his respect and some kindness, and he sent some of his people there to do some things. What happened?
The sons of the son that Nahash sons, instead of being receiving kindness, listen to the enemy, who was
What
some of the people.
you say the enemy?
The enemy, Satan, speaking through the people, through a handful of people.
Does it say that?
Well, if you read it, that's all it is.
What does it say?
That the prince of the people said to Hannah, do you think that David really honors your father because he has sent comforters to you? So he's placed, the enemy has placed doubt in his head.
Well, wait a
To
minute.
make him.
Hold it, fellas. You're saying one person is saying this.
No, it said the princes of the people.
Okay, so the princes of the people. That means
Yes.
several people. We don't know how many.
Yes.
Okay, we
Yes.
don't know how many, but
Yes.
many of the people who were in leadership positions. What did they do when David's messengers came with the peace offering and the
They
kindness?
placed they placed doubt in Hanam's head, in his mind.
Okay, anything else?
By questioning what the David's motives.
Okay, anybody else? What happened? What happened, Marie?
They shaved their heads, didn't they?
They did what?
Shave
Shave
their
their heads.
heads, cut the back of their garments off to the butt part. I don't understand why that.
They pretty much disgraced them.
Yes.
Okay,
What they wanted to do was dishonor David by doing that.
well, we don't know that. Don't read too much into it yet. What evidence do you have that that's what they wanted to do? Okay, we only have what they did. And we can
Hey,
only-
Rudy, I
Yes, ma'am.
say that because when they spoke to Hannah, they said, do you think that David really honors your father because he has sent comforters to you? Did his servants not come to you to search and overthrow and to spy out the land?
Okay,
That's the reason why I say what I said.
they were asking questions. They were asking questions. They're questions that could result in what? Doubt.
She said
That
that.
could result in doubt of the young king's mind. And what evidence do we have that how did that doubt, how did he receive it? Did he dismiss it?
No, he didn't. He reacted on it.
Okay, and when he reacted, what did he do?
He shaved the men and cut their clothes off and sent them back.
As he humiliated them.
Okay, now what was so humiliating about shaving?
It wasn't the shaving, it was cutting their clothes at the buttocks so they're exposed.
How do you know it was just that?
That's what, as you said, you go by what the words say right there. That's the two things that they said they did.
Yeah, but you have made the assumption that it was the cutting off the clothes that humiliated them. And I'm asking you,
And-
why are you saying it was the cutting off of the clothes?
It's both of them. It's shaving their heads because the
Oh.
men, those priests, they were never unshaven. They had hair. That was their, they had hair and they was always clothed according to God's rules or his laws. And they did these things to them in humiliation
Okay,
and to show disrespect to David.
okay, I'm asking you again. You said you're making the assumption that these ambassadors that David sent were priests. You said because the priests had to wear their hair and not shave. Where in here does it say that?
Well, no, they sent messengers.
Okay, just don't want you to go too far in terms of your assumptions. Okay, so whomever they were, the actions that the Ammonites took resulted in embarrassment for them. Okay, shaving their heads, cutting off their beards, cutting their clothes in ways that their buttocks showed. Okay, that was embarrassing. So when David got word of this, what happened? What did he do?
He sent some people out to meet them and told them to stay in Jericho until their beards grew back. He didn't even address the clothing yet.
Okay, so let's go on and see what is David's response to this response to his kindness, to what he considered kindness. Verse 6, Gene.
When the people of Ammon saw that they had made themselves repulsive to David, Hanun and the people of Ammon sent 1,000 talents of silver for hire for themselves chariots and horsemen from Mesopotamia, from Syria, Mecca, and from Zobah. So they hired for themselves 32,000 chariots with the king of the Mecca and his people who had came and encamped before Medeba. Also the people of Ammon gathered together from their cities and came to battle. Now,
Okay, let's go back. Oh, let's stop right there. What does this tell us? What was the response now? When the people found out how David had, and it doesn't tell us how they found out what David's response was to the actions of this young king. But what then occurred?
They knew they did wrong, so they go and they're gonna hire them somebody to defend them against David.
You see, Phyllis, the thing that you're saying is they knew that they had done wrong. I don't see that anywhere in here. Didn't say that they knew that they had done wrong.
That's just my interpretation, Rudy. I'm not.
I want your interpretation. I want that, but I want it to be accurate.
Well, when they said that, verse 6 says, when the sons of Ammon saw that they had made themselves odious to David, what does that mean?
Somebody answer her. It says when they saw that their response, cutting off the hair and shaving the beard and cutting off the clothes of the ambassadors that David sent, when they saw that David's response to that, when they saw what David's response was, in other words, David did something that let them know how he felt about it. Okay. Now, what did David do? It doesn't tell us yet. Okay. It tells us what they did in response to whatever they found out. Okay. Let's see what they did. Look at and tell me what they did. Come on, verse 6 tells you. Verse 6.
Sorry, I was
They
muted.
hired chariots and horses
Right.
for themselves.
I didn't hear you.
They hired chariots and horses.
What's wrong with hiring 6 chariots and horses?
Well, horsemen, well, there's nothing wrong with hiring them. However, they expected something that they did, something that they was expecting David to respond. So it seemed like they were preparing for him to attack them.
Well, you said they hired 5 or 6 horses.
I didn't say 5 or 6. I said they hired themselves for themselves chariots and horsemen. According to verse 6.
Horsemen. They needed men on those horses.
Right, that's why I said horsemen.
And
That's what they did.
Hey,
And-
Rudy, you know in verse 7 it says that they hired 32,000 chariots.
I want you to see that. That's what I wanted you to see.
I stopped because I wanted to make sure that I didn't use my own interpretation. That's why I didn't say anything.
Well, when it's written down there, you don't have to interpret. You can see it. They took. It says they sent 1,000 talents of silver to hire for themselves chariots and horsemen from Mesopotamia because they didn't have them in Ammon.
Right.
Okay. So they sent to the Syrian Manic. They hired 32,000 chariots with the king and his people. They came and they encamped about the city. And the people of Ammon gathered together from the cities and came prepared to fight. And who are they preparing to fight?
David and his army.
David.
I
And
think it seemed like they may have provoked David rather than David really coming after them. They had seemed like they had already decided that they were going to fight.
I don't understand you, Carol.
I said it seemed like they provoked David more so, since they hired the chariots and the horsemen, and then they went up to and encamped before Medeba, and and gathered together for battle. Seemed like they were, they had already planned to do this, and not really. I don't know what David did for them to do what they did, because it doesn't say.
All right.
Hey,
So,
hey, Carol, I think they did, because when David sent those to go to those men and to tell them to just wait until their beards, wait at Jericho until their beards had grown back, and then they was to return. It says in that next verse that they, when the people of Ammon saw that they had made themselves repulsive, that means that was very distasteful, unsatisfying what they did to David. So they knew exactly what they did. And that's why they said, well, you know what, we know what we've really made David angry. So we're going to do something before David would react. We're going to act. Now, I know, Rudy, I'm using my own interpretation, but that's exactly what happened.
y'all all agree to that? So what are the people of Ammon? What are you said they're getting ready to go attack David?
No, they were being prepared for battle in case.
For
Yeah.
a battle
They're just preparing.
preparation.
They are preparing for battle. They have made the assumption that David is going to attack them.
Right.
Is that correct?
Right. Yeah, they have made the assumption that David is going to attack them.
Okay. So something has happened that's not reported here, that they have taken to mean that David is going to attack them for what they've done. Doesn't say here. Okay. Just want us to be clear that Ezra doesn't say what
Right, did he say?
motivation was for them to do what they've done, except they are going on their own feelings about what David is going to do.
And not just on their own feeling, even though it doesn't say what, it says that they saw that David was repulsed.
Okay.
So they're going by what they saw.
All right. So what did they do now when they hired these horsemen or these chariots and these soldiers from Mesopotamia? And then they took some of their own people and went and they encamped out, made their battle lines, and they came ready to come to battle if David came. Now look at verse 8. These folks have done all of that. And look at verse 8. What does it say? When David heard about it.
Yeah.
Didn't say anything about David had organized ordered his army to go out and attack Ammon. Okay. It says when David heard what they were doing or had done, then he responded. So who would you say is responsible for the war that's going to come?
The Ammons.
The Ammonites. They're the ones who, according to this, now remember now, who's writing? I mean, who has written this? This is Ezra's interpretation of the historical documents that he has been able to put together and find. Okay, and it's from the Israelites' perspective. So when David finds out what they have done, David, I mean, what was David's last action towards these people? Friendliness, showing acts of kindness because they had lost their king. And then he gets this response from them where they cut off his messenger's hair and shave their beards and cut off their clothes. And the next thing it tells us is how these people start preparing because they assumed how David would respond. Watch your assumptions, because now they put David in a position where David is saying, hey, these people are prepared for war. Now let's see what happens. Verse 9.
Then the people of Ammon came out and put themselves in battle array before the gate of the city, and the kings who had come were by themselves in the field. When Joab saw that the battle line was against him before and behind, he chose some of Israel's best and put them in battle array against the Syrians. And the rest of the people he put under the command of Abishai, his brother, and they set themselves in battle array against the people of Ammon. Then he said, if the Syrians are too strong for me, then you shall help me. But if the people of Ammon are too strong for you, then I will help you.
All right, stop right there. Here you've got Ezra is recounting the battle as he perhaps understands it from the documents that he has been able to gather. Okay. So he skips along in terms of time and what happens. He skips along. And how do we know that? He says, Joab, when David, verse 8, when David heard about it, he sent Joab and all the army of mighty men. He sent them out to get ready for it. The next action, the people of Ammon, they saw what was going on. They came out and got themselves ready for battle. And then those other kings who had come to help the Ammonites, they got themselves together and they were ready for the battle. Joab saw, and remember in the beginning, not in the beginning, but when those chariots came, remember some of them, they didn't all come in one place. Some came one place and others encamped before another place. So they were in two places. So when Joab, verse 10 tells us, when he saw that battle line was in two different places, what did he do? He divided his troops. And he said for his soldiers, you deal with one group of them, I'll deal with the other group. And if my group feels like if I sense that this group is too much for me and I can't handle them, I'm gonna call you to come help me. And you do the same thing when you deal with the group that you have. Okay, you got that? You see what they're doing? They've divided their army in response to how the Ammonites had set up their battle lines. Okay. Now, verse 13.
Be of good courage. Let us be strong for our people and for the cities of our God. and may the Lord do what is good in his sight.
Okay, now who's this talking?
Joab,
Joab is talking.
And who is Joab?
He's the commander of David's army.
Who's commander?
David.
David. He's the commander of David's army.
Commander of David's army. Okay, so the point I'm making is, where has David's army turned for their direction?
God.
All right.
God.
You see what? When God is with it, okay? When God is with us, that's what they're doing. He's reflecting now the presence of God. So Joab and the people who were with him, they came near for the battle against the Syrians. And when they did, what happened to the Syrians? Look at it.
14. I need to read.
Say it, read it.
So Joab and the people who were with him drew near for the battle against the Syrians, and they fled before him.
They fled before him. The people who had, the Syrians who had gotten themselves arrayed for battle and set up their battle lines and were ready to fight, when Joab and his soldiers came, these, whatever it was, these Syrians saw it. They saw Joab's army. They didn't even fight. They left. They fled. Nothing but God. What happened in verse 15?
When the people of Ammon saw that the Syrians were fleeing, they also fled before Abishai, his brother, and entered the city. So Joab went to Jerusalem.
Okay, so the fact that the group of people that Joab was fighting, they didn't even engage in battle when they saw how the Israelite army was arrayed and coming at them. They just decided, hey, there's no win for us. Let's get out of here. They ran. And Joab had done his part of it. He says he went to Jerusalem. Okay, verse 16.
Now, when the Syrians saw that they had been defeated by Israel, they sent messengers and brought the Syrians who were beyond the river, and Shonath, the commander of Hadadezer's army, went before them. When it was told David, he gathered all Israel, crossed over the Jordan, and came upon them, set up a battle array against them. So when David had set up a battle array against the Syrians, they fought with him. Then the Syrians fled before Israel, and David killed 7,000 charioteers and 40,000 foot soldiers of the Syrians, and killed Shobach, the commander of the army. And when the servants of Hadadezer saw that they were defeated by Israel, they made peace with David and became his servants. So the Syrians were not willing to help the people of Ammon anymore.
Now, get this. When these Syrians who were lined up to assist the Ammonites, when they saw Joab's army, they fled, ran away from him, went in the city. When they saw that they had been defeated, they sent across the Jordan to their Syrians who were over there, the armies who were over there. they sent over there and said, hey, we need some more help. We need you guys to come over and help us fight. So when David found out about that, it says here that David organized his whole army. Said he organized the army and he went against them and essentially he beat them up. They ran away after fighting, and the results of the fighting before they ran away, he killed so many. And these numbers just drive me crazy. Verse 18 says, David killed 7,000 charioteers, 40,000 foot soldiers. And he killed Shohash, the commander of the army. Okay. And when the Syrians saw that they had been defeated, what did they do? They got smart and they said, hey, don't kill all of us. They made peace with them. And they became servants of David's Israel. Again, God's hand on the side of David, giving him victory. Comments, questions?
So what happened to the people, sons of Ammon?
Can't hear you.
I said, what happened to the sons of Ammon?
What happened to the sons of Ammon?
Mm-hmm.
Doesn't tell us here.
Yeah, it says that they fled.
Yeah, well, I
When-
know they
when the
fled.
people in
My point
verse
is, they
15.
started this whole thing.
Yeah,
that-
but you know, cowards always retreat and then have somebody else to proceed in their place.
Oh, yeah, I know. So, yeah.
Now, keep in mind, what is the purpose of this chronicle? To demonstrate to the people and provide to them a basis and a foundation historically of the history of David and Israel. And why? Why preserve David? Why don't they talk about other kings? Why not Samuel? He was the first. What is there about David that's different than others that we know about?
Because he was in God's grace. He's a godly man.
And
God talked to him.
God chose him to be
for
king
what?
over his people,
For what?
Israel.
For what? Come on, y'all.
Isn't that the lineage of Jesus?
Keep on, Karen.
Yes. He that's Jesus, Judah. And that's the lineage of Jesus from David.
And what's the significance? David, what is the covenant that God made with David?
That there'll always be a man on the throne through his lineage. And so that'll be Jesus Christ will be part of that, and is that lineage that's going to be carried on.
In other words, David is the man, the human on the earth whose lineage is going to produce. And what do they call it? They called it in the Hebrews call him the Messiah. The Greeks call him the Christ. And it's David's lineage that's going to be preserved, not Saul's. Saul was king too, not Moses. Moses was in favor with God too. not Aaron, but David. Okay. And so this chronicle is focusing for those people who were enslaved for 70 years. This is a reminder to them that David holds a special place in God's sight. And David's lineage is that through which God will operate. We know something about David that hasn't been mentioned here before. And to us, it's a pretty bad thing. But let's see if how Ezra deals with it. And I'm thinking of David's adultery with this man's wife. You understand what I'm talking about? What's her name?
Bathsheba, and murder of her husband.
All right. Let's see what happens here. Because we haven't gotten to that yet, but we're coming to it. Okay. Go ahead, Gene, start at 20. Any other questions about 19? Showing how powerful David's army was and how he was misunderstood by certain people and certain of the people around, and how he responded and responds to them, and how God is on his side, because even David's warriors would pray and ask God to be with him. So let's see what happens in chapter 20.
And it happened in the spring of the year, at the time kings go out to battle, that Joab led out the armed forces and ravaged the country of the people of Ammon, and came and besieged Rabbah. But David stayed at Jerusalem, and Joab defeated Rabbah and overthrew it.
Okay, wait a minute. Look at here. It said it happened in the spring of the year. And it says at the time kings go out to battle. Okay? So in the spring of the year, it's when kings would go out with their armies to battle. But then it says not that David led out his armed forces. Who? Joab, who was this chief commander. Joab led them out. And somebody was asking a few minutes ago about the people of Ammon and what David did to them. Look, what did Joab do with the army? He ravaged the people of Ammon. Okay? He ravaged the Ammonites. But David, the king, who in the spring would lead out his army, it says David stayed in Jerusalem. David didn't go out that spring. Oh, David. Your army's out and you're in your castle.
Getting ready to do something he's not supposed to.
You see what happens when you don't do what you're supposed to do? He was supposed to be leading his army. And he sent Joab. I guess David was a little tired of fighting. Verse 2, Gene.
Then David took their king's crown from his head and found it to weigh a talent of gold, and there were precious stones in it. And it was set on David's head. Also, he brought out the spoil of the city in great abundance. And he brought out the people who were in it and put them to work with saws, with iron picks, and with axes. So David did to all the cities of the people of Ammon. Then David and all the people returned to Jerusalem.
Okay, look at what it says now. They defeated the Ammonites. Joab and his army defeated the Ammonites. David took their king's crown. After the fighting, David went out, took the king's crown, found out it was a beautiful thing, put it on his head. And then they treated all the people of Ammon as if they were slaves. They put them to work doing what we would call the menial work, the work with saws, where you cut down trees and iron picks, axes. And David and his men and his army went about all of Ammon, and that's what they did in the cities. Once they conquered the cities, they put all the people to work rebuilding and building. Okay? Doesn't tell us any more about David right there, does it? But between the time he sent that army out, if we go back and read in 2 Kings, we find out that David, while he was in Jerusalem waiting for the army, that's when he had this encounter with Bathsheba. It isn't mentioned here. Let's see if it's mentioned in the rest of chapter 20.
Now it Now it happened after that war broke out at Giza with the Philistines, at which time Sabishah the Hushathite killed Sippai, who was one of the sons of the giant, and they were subdued.
Gene, hold it a minute right there. It says something, war broke out at Giza with the Philistines again. What do we know about David and the Philistines?
David defeated Goliath as a little boy,
Who was Goliath?
the giant of the land.
The giant of the land?
He's a giant of he was the giant representing the Philistine.
All right. And David had been called as a young man to face that giant because none of the other Israelite soldiers would come against him. And how did David go? David took his knife and went out after him?
No, his slingshot and the smooth stones.
All right. And what did he do? What happened?
He talked to God and he defied the Philistines, just like the Philistines were defying God.
What was the result of David facing this giant man?
He was
He killed
successful.
him. Yeah. He came in the power of the Lord.
The power
And
of
he-
the Lord, he slew him. He killed him. Took his own sword after he knocked him down with his rock from his slingshot. He knocked him down, took his own sword and killed him. And this man was the giant. He was the lead soldier for the Philistines. And all the rest of the Israelites were afraid to go out and face him because of his reputation, his strength, his size. David went out, killed him. Now, that giant, before David killed him, Israel tells us that that giant had siblings. Okay? There were other members of that family who evidently they had gigantic something about them. Okay? Now, this is who he's talking about when he talks about one of the sons of the giant. Okay? They killed one of them. Let's go to verse 5 and see what happened.
And again there was war with the Philistines, and Elhanan the son of Jair killed Lamni, the brother of Goliath the Gittite, the shaft of whose spear was like a weaver's beam.
Now,
Yet
somebody help me right here. Uh, I'm not familiar with the weaver's beam. Are any of you familiar with it when it says, I wasn't able to find anything, when it says the shaft of the spear was like a weaver's beam?
I'm thinking it's one of those real flexible spears that because they use it and then when you throw it, it's like I've seen one before when you throw it at the target, it doesn't, it's not real straight, but it has a
Anybody know anything about the weaver's beam?
can't remember.
If you find anything about it, let me know because I don't know. I don't know if it has to do with sharpness or whether it had to do something with curves or what. If you do, let me know. It says the shaft of the spear of this giant, brother of the giant, was like a weaver's beam. Well, we do know what the shaft of the giant Goliath, we know what his sword was like because that's what David took to kill him. And I'm just curious to know, Ezra describes this, and I'm just wondering what purpose. Yet again, verse 6, Gene.
Yet again there was war at Gath, where there was a man of great stature, with 24 fingers and toes, 6 on each hand, and 6 on each foot. And he also was born of the giant. So
Born,
when
born to the giant, Gene. Not
I'm
born of, born
born
to the
to
giant.
the giant, sorry, and he was also born to the giant.
Now listen, here we're talking about a family. And what do we say that, what is it that runs in families? The DNA, we call it DNA. And there must be something in the DNA of this family because we get Goliath, who is 7 feet or more, 8 feet or more tall and strong. Then we get his brothers who are big. Now we get a son of one of them who has 24 fingers and toes. So they have abnormalities throughout the generations.
Rudy, they have giantism.
Giant, go on, Phyllis.
No, it's such thing. There's people like that even today. And then there's another word for it too.
Giantism. Is that what you said, Phyllis? Okay.
Yes,
Giantism. Okay. Well, and you say there's another word too?
there's a medical term for it as well.
Okay. Okay. All right. So, verse 7.
So when he so when he defied Israel, Jonathan, the son of Shimei, David's brother, killed him. These were born to the giant in Gath, and they fell by the hand of David and by the hand of his servants.
Okay. So David killed the giant. And then the giant's siblings were killed. And we find that David's son killed the one who had the 6 fingers and 6 toes on each hand and foot. So not only did David kill a giant, his son ended up killing a giant.
His brother.
His brother.
Yeah.
Historically, do you see how this might make any difference to the people who are coming out of 70 years of bondage? You see how this might make any difference? How it might set David off differently than other kings? These unusual things about David and his family.
It would give them a sense of pride of themselves as a people.
It could. Anything else? Any questions? Any comments, y'all? You're mighty quiet today. Heard anything about?
Hey, Bill.
Have you heard anything about Bathsheba?
Come on, Rudy.
Huh?
Nope.
Yes, no. Can't hear you.
You wanna
Nope.
say
No, I wonder why. Any idea?
I wouldn't think she would be in there because Israel, he's telling the history of the people. She was not, let me shut up. I see the way you're looking at me.
No, I don't want to shut you up. I just want you to say what is. What is the purpose, do you suppose, of this chronicle that Ezra is putting together?
The lineage of God's people, the people of Judah.
And
Is
then put-
establishing their history so they know where they came from, what all the things that their country has been through, and how God has been the one has carried them through all of the things that they have been through.
and focusing now on David for the purpose that somebody said earlier, that God has this covenant with David, that it's through his lineage that the Messiah will come. It's from his lineage that the Messiah will come. So if that is God's purpose, then what did David do that was so bad with this woman? 2 things. One, come on,
He coveted another man's wife.
let's see, and not only coveted her.
He
had her.
had her husband killed
Yes.
on the line.
Wait a minute.
He had
before-
Joe. He had
before-
He
Joe.
not only covenant, he lay with another man's wife, got her pregnant, and then killed her husband to
wait,
cover it up.
wait a minute. You're talking a whole lot of sin now. I want to know what the sin is. One, he coveted somebody's wife.
Yes.
What's the second sin?
Murder.
No, before he murdered the man, what did he
He
do
lay
to
with the wife.
What did he do with her?
He lay with the wife. He had sex with her.
Talk to me about lay.
He,
What's the,
he impregnated her.
that's not the sin. What's the sin? On a married man and a married woman.
He had
He
sex with a
committed
married
adultery.
woman,
It's
committed
adultery.
with her.
It's adultery.
Adultery is the sin. The
Mhm.
first sin is covetousness. The second sin was adultery. Okay. Then when the woman got pregnant and he wanted to cover it up, he made arrangements to do what?
You
To
have
have
her.
husband
Murder.
He
He
murdered
committed murder after that.
the man, the woman's husband. Okay. Covetousness, adultery, murder. Those are some pretty bad sins. Okay? But what does God say about his sin, about our sin, if we confess them?
He's
He
faithful,
forgive you.
just to forgive us.
To forgive us, he will forgive us,
Mhm.
and he said he would throw that sin
Away. Out.
eh? He would forget that sin. That's what God is doing here.
Yeah.
He's demonstrating through Ezra and Ezra's rendition of the Chronicles that God will forget the sin. And that's what he's done, it seems, with David and those sins associated with the woman Bathsheba, because God hasn't mentioned them yet. And he's well beyond that time. Now, doesn't say God won't remember some things, does it? All right. But he's thrown that sin beyond, where you say he will throw it where? As far as the east is from the west? So God doesn't mention that. He's keeping David in a positive light throughout the Chronicles. Any questions? Any comments? We got time, Jean Marie?
Yes, you do.
Okay, let's go to 21 then.
Now Satan stood up against Israel and moved David to number Israel.
Wait a minute. Wait a minute. This is the first time I've seen this word in the Chronicles. Who is it? That's Ezra
Satan.
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 Just
giving Satan credit here for doing something. He isn't implying it. He is saying Satan did this. David was motivated by Satan. Satan stood up against Israel and he moved David to do something. Didn't say that Satan stood up and moved David to covet Bathsheba, or to have adultery with Bathsheba, or to murder Bathsheba's husband. But he says it right here that Satan is responsible for it. So if you are part of the 70 people coming back to Israel after 70 years, and you have a question about why is this sin being mentioned, well, Ezra tells you right away, this was the work of Satan. Right? God permitted this. Satan doesn't do anything without permission. Satan can't create anything. So it says now, Satan stood up against Israel. Right? And whatever he did, it resulted in David taking the population. Okay? Let's see what happened.
So
Jean?
David said to Joab and to the leaders of the people, "Go, number Israel from Beersheba to Dan, and bring the number of them to me that I may know it." And Joab answered, "May the Lord make his people 100 times more than they are, but by my lord, the king, are they not all my lord's servants? Why then does my lord require this thing? Why should he be a cause of guilt in Israel?"
Wait a minute. Wait a minute. David gave instructions to Joab. See, go out and number the people, all the people from Beersheba to Dan, and bring them to me. What's David asking for? He wants to know how many people are there, huh? How many people are in his country? How many people are in his kingdom? Come on, David. It's God's kingdom. God will tell, God knows the number.
Here we see where Satan calls David
Right.
to be arrogant, to want to have a census, because before it didn't matter.
That's right. But Satan knows how to come between us and God if we follow him. So Satan and Joab, what are you going to say about Joab?
Joab understood. It seemed like he was trying to talk David out of not doing it. That he has no need to do it. Doesn't everybody belong to God?
And that is what you would think would be David's position, wouldn't it?
Yes.
But who is David listening to?
The devil.
All right.
Satan.
All right. And what does that tell us? You may even be a child after God's own heart. But
Oh, the enemy know how to try to get to you.
don't think Satan won't try to get to you. And he got to David because David acted. Joab recognized